It's a strange morning. It's not like this usually in Athens, and we have you to thank for bringing this sad British weather here. If you haven't had some already, there's coffee and like snacks and things to keep up your energy in the corner there. So please help yourself. We have 4 speakers here talking about things that Angus loves and that I love too, which is they're talking about narratives and storytelling. We've picked them intentionally from across campus. To give us a sort of interdisciplinary flavor of the topic. We always organize conferences around the speaker for our Torrance lecture, the one who's doing the Torrance lecture, and Angus is the world leader on storytelling. And this is something that's very close to my heart, perhaps because I always love stories. Everyone who I know, who knows me well, will always know that I'm always bugging people and saying, tell me a story, tell me how that went, yeah? So so I'm very interested to know all about these things I have no idea about in storytelling. We start with Kimberly, who's run here from class and has to run back to class after this. So thank you for making it here. And she is going to talk about this. This is a new title. Why do good people create bad algorithms and how do we stop them? So thank you, Kimberly, for being here.
Thank you. That is the wrong title. Okay.
We can just put on the music again.
Well, okay, I'm going to try to do this and talk so I can at least kind of not get myself any further behind than I was. So I have to open up the box. So I am a philosopher who teaches interdisciplinary courses, cross-listed philosophy and computer science. My teaching background is I started teaching, this looks like the right one. Sorry, let me see. Yes, because it should be how do we teach students to save the world, do science fiction, and this is the subtitle. Let me see how I can send this to myself again. All right. So my background is teaching engineers. I am a philosopher of mind, philosopher of science, and so I've been teaching engineers for a long time, and computer scientists in lots of ways are engineers. So what I want to talk about is some of the issues that come up in AI and why they come up. And then talk about why I think fiction might be what will help us fix this.
Let me know when you get to it.
I know, really close.
Lights, camera.
All right. Just need to open it anyway. Downloading. There we go. This is going much better. It's also going to let me do the thing I want to do, which is important. All right, there we go. We're all set.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, that's a better. So I work for a long time at Rensselaer Polytechnic. This is my 3rd year at UGA working with the AI students. Our undergrad program is cognitive science. Our grad program is in MS and AI. And one of the things that I'm here to challenge in my program largely is ethics is often kind of taught as an afterthought, right? We're solving the problems, we're solving the problems, we're solving the problems. Oh yeah, do it ethically. Now go back to solving the problems, right? So one of the things I want to have happen with them is to really get them thinking ethically from the start so that they don't separate these as 2 separate tasks. So one of the things I'm going to do here, for one, my slides are terrible, so I'm going to start with a task so that you just get really active. Also, that's the reason I like to go first thing in the morning, is that way I get everybody kind of moving a little bit. Picking up the room. All right, so this is what we call a naive task. I am not assuming you know anything. If you recognize it, I would actually like you to know about and just kind of be an observer and watch the other people. Really don't overthink it because I'm not going to give you enough time. So you're really just going to have to go fast because this is not the main thing we're doing. Okay, there is a lag here. Okay. Which means we like. Okay, so this is a case from Kahneman and Tversky. Is anyone familiar with their work? Probably are. Okay, so to the degree you are, I want you to just kind of sit back and watch. I'll have you doing some group. So here's the story. Linda's 34, and I did this with students yesterday. I'm like, we have to update this. Linda's 34, single, outspoken, and very bright. In college, she majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. So a lot of you will be able to place this in the 80s, when it was, I think it was actually written in the 70s. But. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to give you a list, and I want you as fast as you can, because this is not what we're going to spend our time on. Place them into really likely, not likely, and then I'm really not sure, somewhere in the middle. So be as blunt, like don't overthink it. Okay. Great. Linda is an elementary school teacher, works in the bookstore, takes yoga, feminist, psychiatric social worker, League of Women and Voters, bank teller, insurance salesman, bank teller, feminist. Well, 30 more seconds, it really is fast. At least have them kind of roughly grouped. So what I'm going to do, we don't have to worry about the numbers so much, is I think I'll have you three be a group, maybe you four be a group, you three be a group. Are you familiar with this case?
Only marginal.
Okay, I'm going to have you maybe work with these people and they don't know what it is. Go ahead. All right, so here's the thing. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do this as a group. Yeah. And I'm going to put a timer up. There you go. 3 minutes.
Well, that's where I was. It's like, that's a lot of stuff that I don't want to make about an urban person without actually knowing them in. Franklin College, personal design from the office.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
I think that would be
This one.
so many change. That was really hard, so.
Well, let's maybe put that under we don't know. How about if we disagree as a group, we don't know? I felt there, so did we all think that she was
So the cards you have are not for this yet. So those cards, just hold on to them, they're not about this. Correctly.
I did.
We can put it in that.
Right, because we don't know that, like, your main assumption.
These cards do not link to this directly. It's a little scary. Yeah, sure. So yeah, put those into like 3 weeks. Highly likely. Last 30 seconds, 15 seconds. Tell you what. Yes, 30 seconds.
I like the fact that you're constantly disagreeing with us. This is totally good. No, that's what I mean.
Let's make on like, wait, we're going back to.
All right. Okay.
I'm very platonic if I'm teaching them.
Yeah, I got
All right, 15 seconds for real this time. No, I think you're right.
For our recent presentation.
Not overthinking it. All right. So here's something that you see. One of the things we used to do in my chorus, so it was like, 80, 20 to 70-year-olds, is when somebody in the front raised their hand, everyone just finished their sentence and raised their hand, and then you can actually kind of cut these things off really quickly, but not without me having to yell or sing. All right. There's a lag. So really, I'm only interested in CF and H. So what I want you to do, so what the cards are, is you have C before F before H, C before H before F, H before C, or E is something else, if that doesn't capture what you did. Okay. So you have those cards, so I want you to pick which card matches how you ranked those three. You're not allowed to change it. All right. Does everyone have their card? So closest, whatever is closest. All right.
Oh, yeah, we went to see.
So when I count to 3, hang on, when I count to 3, identify your card, do not raise it yet. You all are still identifying your card. Ready? All right, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. So we have 3 Bs.
4 Bs.
4 Bs. Yes, I can't count this morning. This is really great for somebody teaching data mining. All right, good. So, right, it seems to us she's most likely a feminist. If not likely a feminist and a bank teller, and least likely that she would be a bank teller. Who would be willing to explain how their group put it in that order?
Me?
Yeah.
Me? Okay, so we
Yeah,
thought
that was
we thought because of her commitment to social justice, she would likely be a feminist. We also thought because of her commitment to social justice, she might be less likely to be a bank teller. And, we thought, as a bank teller and feminist together, I think some of us had a little bit of cognitive dissonance that the two were even possible to be together. So there was some tendency to rank that as actually not possible. But then I think we kind of came together and we're like, well, that seems like that could be possible because people can be different and have different things that they're doing with their lives.
Right, to like go rogue and get into the bank.
Yes.
And then
Yes,
you
there you
have
go.
a system from within.
Right?
Like give loans to.
Okay.
Right?
Sorry, right? There's so much cool stuff that we could do with this. So I want to reassure, so first, before I say this, how many of you have had stats or logic? Okay. I'm going to apologize for what comes next. The good news is you are normal humans. My students not always are. Oh, the lag is going to kill me. All right, sorry, I know it's not nobody's fault. So here's the thing. What you did is what most people do, right? She seems so the stereotype of a feminist. If you don't overthink it and you don't do that, we think feminist and bank teller, bank teller. The challenge is it's not possible. It's literally not possible in terms of likelihood. So this is the conjunction effect. Oh, you can't see the green on here. So if you think about it, right, there's a circle right here. Feminist and bank teller cannot be more likely than either of the parts. All of you who have logic or stats have learned this at one point. But the thing is even people who work in stats will do this out of context. because this is how humans are built. And your humanness will override your disciplinary knowledge. Now, my students often are coming from stats or coming from logic. So, but even yesterday, I did this yesterday with my AI class, and out of 5 groups, one of them were normal humans. And lots of the other ones had to be talked out of the normal human view. But we do this. This is a really stable thing that humans do, and that is we will misrank likelihood when things are combined this way. Now, what will a post hoc do is say, well, I thought you meant bank teller and not feminist. Sure, okay. Even so, it doesn't change likelihood. Really quick, this is just going to be individual. Which of these seem the least likely to you? Don't shout it out yet, sorry. It's so hard. Right, so I'm going to just go through them. How many of you would say A seems the least likely? How many of you would say B seems the least likely? How many say C? Why say D? For those of you who said D, what was your thinking?
Well,
You were just gaming it?
well, when you look at all of them, only one of them starts with T, it's the last one.
Ah, okay,
Also,
nice.
I don't know,
No, I like that.
so it just seemed like it's
Okay, cool. Somebody who said A, what was your thinking? Right, there's a pattern there, right? Same for B, typically. We see a pattern there. What's the trick to this? Anyone know?
They're all, it's like,
Yeah. Right. Well,
you made us answer those, so.
I did. Well, and the fact is, right, even those of you who know that, there's a little itch when you say that. It's like, but if I saw that first one, I would think I was not dealing with it.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Oh, I know. Right. But the thing is, it really does not feel that way, right? My students yesterday, after getting Linda right, still screwed this up, right? They know you'd think they'd be on to me, especially because they know me, right? But the fact is, right, but what happens is, when we look at A and B, we see a pattern there. When we look at C and D, they seem the same to us, right? We don't distinguish C and D. So what we have in our minds is this kind of cognitive model of not random things, which are patterned, and random things. And that pattern things is much smaller, and the random things much bigger. But really, if we were going to do that, you have to think about this exact order of heads and tails. The exact order of C is different than the exact order of D. But we don't process that as normal humans, when being normal humans. So what's happening here is, oh my gosh. So there's a heuristic, and this is a big thing in programming. But humans are built like this too, and that is, we are built with cognitive shortcuts, and this is what makes us smart. This is what allows us to process a ton of information really quickly, right? So if you think about us back in the state of nature, right, as a hypothetical, we're living on the savannah or we're living in the woods, it's really important that you recognize that things that make loud noises are probably going to kill you, and so you should run away, right? Or even build biological versions of this, right? What happens when a baby eats something bitter? Always looking for people to actually do the face, right? They go, right? They try to actually get it out of their mouth. And we're built like that because most poisonous things are bitter. So by having built in an aversion to bitter things, you naturally avoid poisons. You also miss out on chocolate and coffee. Right? So we've overcome this. But what happens here is one of the ways we're built is we use representative to mean likely. Right? Looks like a duck, sounds like a duck. It's a duck. So what we do is we use we judge how probable it is that X is an F of some sort by how representative it is of this. This is where stereotyping comes from. We are built to stereotype. Because it's often a good strategy. I forgot I took out a ton of my notes so that my slides weren't as horrible. as usual. This is how, this is how we discovered vaccines, right? Jenner is like, hey, the milkmaids don't get smallpox, but they get cowpox. Ooh, maybe there's a pattern here. How likely is it that he's angry? Well, he's stomping, his face is red, and he's kind of like this, probably angry, right? But they're very different, right? So this is why tall people always get asked if they play basketball. Most tall people do not play basketball, but most basketball players are tall. Right? So they're very different judgments. So this is what we call a cognitive bias. It has nothing to do with what you care about. It's not motivated reasoning in any way. It's a way you process information as it comes in into your head. Right? And the problem with it is, we do it so automatically, it's really hard to catch. You add to this, and this will be something that we're going to talk about the positives of this later, but one of the things is we're such automatic storytellers. We will post hoc rationalize it too. And that happens so quickly that we can't see it. And there are experiments that show like really interesting cases of this, where we know things about how they made their judgment that they don't know, and they will tell a story that makes perfect sense, and they don't know why they're telling that story. Right, so it causes it, this is why we believe, in terms of like anti-vaccination, people who are concerned with anti-vaccination, they're seeing patterns. They just can't process that those patterns are not significant ones. Right, that takes a lot of stats and things. And the other problem is we do this when we don't care, and it often gets built by repeated patterns that we're exposed to. So there's this whole issue of implicit biases. You can go to Harvard's Project Implicit and take tests that'll kind of give you a sense of which of these associations you might have built in you. And it's despite what you want, right? If you see a crowd scene in a movie, for most people, what percentage has to be women for people to perceive it as 50-50? 35%.
Oh.
If it's 35% women and 70% men, people will see it as 50-50 because we're so not used to seeing that kind of equal representation. Right? We have to imagine it's even worse with race, right? So because we're exposed to these patterns and we're built for patterns, we internalize them. And then they're used for processing because they, in the history of humanity, they were good. In a complex social environment, they're not good in boys. Okay. So they're really hard to avoid. Okay. So now the challenge is somebody teaching AI students, algorithms will absorb these biases, is the short version of this. And that is machine learning programs inherit social patterns reflected in their training data without any directed effort by programmers to include such biases. Now this is a huge problem because we have a tendency to think that technology is objective. And in a lot of cases, we're building AI with the idea of it will make less biased decisions than we do. But if we're not super careful, it will just inherit our biases. In particular, these implicit biases that we're not always aware of. Right? So machine learning trained on the products of human culture will pick up the same stereotypes. And there's evidence, we can see this in different places. Right. And it's not even easy to fix, because in trying to fix it, you will often lose accuracy in the judgment. That's the problem. That's one of the problems. We'll get out of there. This is a big challenge for trying to program this. And in particular, this is coming from a paper by Gabrielle Johnson, who talks about the algorithmic bias. But some of the examples that have come up, right? This is the one that I think is really, there's some discussion about implicit bias that people say, well, it'll show up in this test, but it doesn't actually affect people's behavior. Well, if you train language models on English language, it will pick up the same associations that the implicit association test picks up. So if you give it women's names, it'll pick up family, it'll connect it to family words, not career words. If you give it stereotypically African-American names, it will connect it to negative things rather than positive things, which is exactly the sort of thing we see on the implicit associations test. This is a really famous, how many of you have heard of the Amazon resume? Yeah. So it's a really famous case. They were trying to do the right thing. They're like, you know what? we don't trust, we're all guys here. That's not right. We need to find a way to more impartially look at resumes. So they built a learner, and they trained it on the resumes of people there, but blinded for gender. And what do you bet? Right? It immediately returned almost no female candidates. And this is a huge issue. Machine learners are lazy, really, really lazy, and they're just trained to look for patterns. So they'll see patterns we don't intend for it to see. So it figured out really quickly, somebody said, it figured out 5 of the 7 sister schools, and immediately that was something it was using to knock people out. Girls Who Code, women's lacrosse, right? It figured out gender on its own when it was specifically aimed at not. Because there are so many things in our culture that serve as proxies for gender or for race. Zip
Can
code.
I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So it clearly started recognizing on its own and patterning, but why, what was the then choice of reject? Like, why did the learner
It doesn't match the
reject?
people who succeed here.
Okay, so.
So they
So
use people who are really
sorry, it built in like a reflection, like it's something to, like, here's what we love.
Here are
Look for this stuff.
Here are the resumes of
Gotcha.
people who work here and are really successful.
Perfect.
Sorry, I probably left that out.
Oh, no, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding like the final death knell.
Yeah,
like,
no, thank you.
So it-
That,
Yeah, it was like the data in that they used to build it is what created the bad result
Right.
coming out.
Right, so the intention was, what are the important patterns in the resumes? But what they weren't thinking about the fact that they're all male, that's something the algorithms are lazy. If they're like, oh, that's a really easy way to match this.
right.
It will do similarly, there's a really great case of they were a dermatological lab. They were trying to, can it identify tumors? So they trained it on a bunch of x-rays. And one of the things it was using to determine whether there was a tumor or not is whether or not there was a ruler in the picture.
Oh.
Because they weren't thinking, right? They're just like, oh, here are tumors. Because we don't think about that, but it's lazy. Right? This is one of the problems if you have unbalanced data. So if you have like a rare disease and you're trying to put things in, it'll figure out really well. If I just always say it's not the disease, my accuracy rate will be really high.
Right.
Right? So it's really hard to get them to manage when there's unbalanced data.
There was a problem with Twitter that used 3D AI to recognize faces, to put the picture like in frame, but they didn't recognize black color, so they didn't really just like.
Google Photos at one point was marking black people as gorillas because it hadn't been trained on enough black faces. So the next closest, it didn't recognize them as human faces. And again, the bigger problem is nobody intends this. The other problem is capitalist, and that is the companies go, we'll fix it later. And they're not worried about the effect that it has on somebody who's been humanized for hundreds of years in this country to have their pictures automatically labeled as gorillas. Similar thing, facial software works significantly better on white men, terrible on black women, and it's because the guys in the building train it on themselves. So it's not bad on Asian men too. Ad targeting software presents coaching for high-paying jobs to men and not women. This kind of thing is really troubling because we can't always see what they're doing. We only see what we're being presented. We don't see, and there's often not a way to see these other things. So there are a couple of sources, and one in particular is where I'm going with this that I want to propose that maybe fiction will be what can help us. So what is inaccurate labels? And that is often what we do is when we train it, we have a bunch of data. So we have like resumes or pictures, and we label it as like good or bad, or human, not human, whatever. So one of the problems that can happen is the person putting the labels on the training set is inaccurate. And that can be they were sloppy, they weren't thinking, it could be that they were implicitly biased or actually biased, right? All of those things can happen there. This problem of unbalanced data is really troubling, and the Gabrielle Johnson paper really talks well about both the technology that affects this, but that's just a hard problem, even if we're trying to detect oil slips in the ocean.
So I was talking with my high schooler, and he plays video games, and he's talking about spaghetti code in 70s video games where like the source code is published, and it's like, what were these people doing? And so it's built incorrectly to begin with, but they keep perpetuating it because nobody will go back and fix it. Is that an issue here?
That's a bigger issue. So that's the issue where like a lot of these companies will know when they release software that it's biased against Black people. And what they'll do is we'll fix it later. It's really hard to fix, like really hard. And but again, they want to make money. They will make the money. They will often survive any press that comes from this, and then they'll just keep trying to patch it. I was playing a little stupid word game, and it offered me a racial epithet that starts with a J that probably most of you don't even know, and I'm not going to say, but those of you who know will be horrified. And I'm like, yeah, I know, there's no way you would know it. But it's, and I wrote to them, and I'm like, oh, this is not okay. Like, can you imagine if a person of color were replaying this, and it was offered to me by the game as an option for spelling. And they're like, oh man, what they had done is they've taken an open source dictionary, and they were not careful enough in going through, right, 'cause a lot of words, and it is a rare enough epithet. Again, any of you know what I'm talking about? Starts with a J, ends with boo.
Yeah, I do.
Right? It's a horrific
It's
name.
horrible.
It's really horrible. And a bunch of young guys aren't familiar with historical epithets, so they probably looked for the big ones. And he was just like, well, we'll have to, we're not updating a lot, we'll have to wait for the next update. It might be a while. And I'm like, but again, this is business. This is the business aspect of this. So I'm really interested in this aspect where it's a reflection of social bias, right? So this is this problem with hot proxies. Learners are lazy. All they're trying to do, most of the time what they're given is test data that has labels on it. And they try to figure out, okay, how do I determine the yeses from the nos? Right? A really standard toys data set using data mining is like, there's some unspecified game, and it's play yes or no, and it's all these different weather aspects. Right? So it's trying to figure out which of these attributes will help me determine whether we play the game or not. In other words, like contact lens data. We look at astigmatism, we look at prescription frames, we look at how old they are, these sorts of things, whether or not we give them hard, soft, or no contact lenses. So it's looking for what are the patterns in those things I've been given to work with that help me make this decision really accurately. If there is a proxy built in, so like in the Amazon resume case, when you give them all male things, they figured out, oh, if they're male, we hire them. Right? If all these things and male, so male ended up being a checkmark in there. So it wasn't even an attribute they were given, it's one it figured out because it let it make accurate descriptions, even though that was nobody's intention. Okay, so good, thank you. So what's happening here, I currently teach upper vision students, and it takes me a third of the semester to convince them that technology is not objective, maybe a quarter, and I can get them on board with, I'm going to exclude that, that's always important. Oops, no, it's good. Okay, right, I can do 1 and 2. It's this one that I think is so embedded by the time they get to me that I want to fix it. So I'm in the process of developing a first-year course where I want to empower them to see themselves as shapers of the future. So that as they're programming, it's not just about how to solve this problem, it's how do I solve this problem in a way that creates a future that's worth living, or that creates a future that at least moves toward justice. And they struggle with that. They really think, right, I ran this by I ran this by an engineer, and he thought this was actually, and I'm like, right, screw servers, he thought this was too generous to them. Because he really was like, not only if I don't build it, somebody else will, nobody can build it as well as I do. But I think even behind this is, and there's no way we can interfere with progress. And I can get them a little bit off of that. But I think it's this imagination piece that they really need help with. So I'm developing a responsible AI course that I want, in addition to kind of looking at how like data mining works, we're going to play with some toy programs, and talking about some of how the effects affect people, I also want them thinking about how do worlds change? How do decisions affect kind of, the 7 generations kind of notion? So my premise is spending some time with speculative fiction might be the thing that helps them do that, especially if I catch them before they're all into the programmer, we solve problems. So this is going to be a humanities course that I would eventually like to be a core course, because it will suck them in. They won't see, it'll be under the arty, they won't realize it's philosophy. But I really want them to get in a sense where they can anticipate the impacts of the programs they create and shape those impacts more intentionally. So that we don't get into this, oh wow, look, it's biased. Oh well. That as they're making programming decisions, they start going, ooh, is this the sort of thing that is likely to lead to? And that's how we work with cognitive biases in general, is we practice a lot with, I'm making this decision. Is this one of those cognitive biasy things? Maybe I step back and think about what I'm doing. I want them to do that as programmers. This is an example that I know some other people have used. It's a piece of fiction where they create these digital pets, right? So it's something like Farmville from way back in the day. I was a member of Glitch, which was just a really great multiplayer game that died and then became Slack. But what's really cool about this is right, they start off as like digipets back in the day, just online things, but then they're able to build the code where they can actually download them into little robot bodies so they can spend time in the real world exploring, and these robot bodies like have tactile. But then what happens is the company that was supporting this gets sold, and the next company is willing to support it for a while, but these things learn, and they ask emotional questions, and they start kind of, right, it's hard to read it and not think about like, oh yeah, are we creating artificial life, and do we have obligations to it? So I'm hoping, and this is where I wanted to kind of throw it open, and I kind of built these to go over fast. That this kind of getting immersed in stories and seeing maybe even cases where a decision somebody makes has implications in a realistic way might be the way we do this, right? Because we know effective learning often makes changes in people that rational, right? Those of you who've had stats, who screwed up Linda, right? Or who screwed up right? We're human first. And just beating people with the facts does not work. We know that with COVID, we know that with vaccines. So here, I think possibly using fiction to pull in them as humans before they have fully identified as programmers might help prevent the blinders that they put on when they are in programming mode. So I think I have, say 4 or 9?
4 more minutes?
Okay. So I wanted to just kind of open it up both to help me and just to have a discussion. What do you think? Do you have suggestions for pieces? Do you have you used anything like this that has been helpful for that, or that you think so? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, first of all,
Oh my God, I'm so excited to come in. I
yeah,
think
no,
we'll stay
if you
today.
want to talk later, we should talk later, but
Yeah.
absolutely everything you're saying, totally agree with it. Just a couple researching things if you're interested.
Yeah, that was the things I don't have research on this yet.
We found that when you give engineers speculative fiction, it not only increases their empathy and their curiosity, but their ability to make major breakthroughs in technology. And the key there is actually that a lot of really interesting technology has to be imagined before the logic can come in and build it. And we find that when you only train engineers in logic, they make increasingly better and better refinements to existing technology, but they don't actually come up with new stuff. One thing that often helps when I talk to engineers is I say to them, it won't just make you a nicer, better person, it will make you richer. Because you will actually invent something more useful. So there's
And that's hugely motivating to
Yeah.
this guy. Just
Rich, nice, and
yeah,
better.
you know, and they don't have to just, I mean, sci-fi I think is the best because it does something that we call counterfactual thinking. And counterfactual is different from fiction. Counterfactual is if you change one element of reality, what happens, as opposed to like fantasy stuff.
Yeah, and this is, and I'm hoping you talk about this. I was going to mention this. Right, we know just fiction doesn't work because look at the reactions to criticisms of Game of Thrones. Right, when people say, "Why is there so much rape?" Right, what's the reaction people give to that? That's how it would have been. There are freaking dragons, right? So N.K. Jemisin is somebody I want to kind of get into more because like she talks about world building and she's like, we can do anything we want. And what do we get? We get tentacle sharks. We take a shark and we put a tentacle on it, right? We take medieval England and we put dragons in. And yeah, thank you. That's really helpful.
I'm a huge science fiction fan, and you know, I will say it does trend toward dystopian futures.
Yes, I want to go more on the utopian.
Yeah, so it made me kind of think of two things. There's one author, Michael Moorcock, who wrote this trilogy that I love, Dancers at the End of Time. And it's not just dystopian, and it is like the most world-building sci-fi trilogy I've ever read. It's so fantastic. But I was also thinking it'd be so fun to have students like even just take pieces of text and be like, okay, this was the decision that was made, and then here's what happened. What if they, like you were saying, what if they made this decision? Because that can also be so powerful. It's like, you know, that speculation, and then that leads as the platform to how they're gonna make their own future story.
Well, and that goes back to the counter. That's practicing the
That's
counterfactual.
Exactly, yeah, and it's also like,
And really identifying it and making it explicit.
well, and also what I was thinking too when you were talking about, you know, these biases that, you know, the learners have, it's interesting to speculate what happens when, you know, technology is building itself, because you think, okay, well, this thing is going to be ingrained, but that's different than, you know, there's more control to switch the script when technology is building itself, and it's like, ooh, I wonder if it will. Is how I feel about the future. I'm like, I wonder. Yeah, I would totally succumb to that. I'm playing at the mercy of the robots, so.
Well, and, you know, and this is one of those, I even got into this, like, oh, super intelligence, this is going to be really cool. People are being harmed physically now. They're being put in jail, they're being denied health care, they're being given differential health care. I'm so much more concerned about that. Like, super intelligence is so far off. It really is. Like, the guy who's like, oh, this is alive. Whatever is alive now. But like right now, there are people in jail for bad facial rec because the tech is objective. So it wasn't motivated, it wasn't racist. So really, that's the part that I'm more even concerned about is I want them to realize their decisions will put people in jail. Their decisions will get black people bad health care, right? That sort of thing.
Within world gaming, like where they're building and creating a narrative with other people, help kind of see what they build and what the consequences of that would be.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Yes. I mean, when you
I would
interact with
assume.
other people, the problem is when you have a one-on-one relationship with technology, then you're getting everything from the technology. When you put multiple humans in the space, it's like how when children play on a playground together, you know, they develop more of an ethical sense than when they're just playing a video game.
Right.
That makes sense. Like Glitch was a sandbox game, and it was great. And every now and then, people would come in, and their whole intention was just to mess with it. And what would happen is, as a community, we'd be like, bye. We would just
Right,
like,
you become like a self-governing community.
Yeah.
well, and definitely that like we insisted on the world being the world we wanted, in a way that the trolls.
But then like if you have it and you could change, like you were saying, like one thing changes in your environment, so all of a sudden you log into this open building and you live underwater now, like what are you doing in that community to change, like, I'm just wondering if that helps with kind of like that, putting them into the narrative or the fictional part of it, and then saying, you can apply this in your other work.
No, that's a great idea. I'll think about that too. The problem there is just I would have to find a game and get good at it. But I think it is, you know, long term, possibly a good choice to have. Right, I think we've
So we have loads of questions, but we have lunch and everything else to catch up with. Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Thank you.